Today I want to do some life pie with you, but I'm not going to read to you. I'm just going to do like an analysis on each chapter for you. So I'm going to link this man's YouTube channel who reads chapters, and I'll do like along with his reading schedule, the analysis schedule, so you don't have to read, because I know a lot of you don't like reading. So the first thing I want to note is that the author of this book is Jan Martel. Okay, but when you open up in the book, you're going to find an author's note. This is not Jan Martel's author's note. This is part of the book, so you have to read that. Please read that. It's like very important. Okay, so a couple of things to note about the author's notes. It's the man who writes Pie's story, because now this is a story about Pie. But Pie doesn't write it, an author writes it for him. That's why this is important to read, because it's not the author of this book, it's the author of Pie's story. Okay, so basically he talks about a novel that failed and how he's going to go to India to write a book about Portugal, and that book also fails, and he ends up going a little further down India, and he meets an old man in Pondicherry who tells him that he has a story that will make him believe in God. So now you must understand, because he's a writer, when people ask him what he does, he says like, oh, I'm a writer, and then people always say, I have a story for you. But he always says like the stories lack like empathy, or they just lack that factor that makes a good story. So he says to this man, and it will make me believe in God. So he's like saying, I don't really believe you, but you're saying it will make me believe in God. So the old man says yes. And then he says, that's a tall order. So he's basically saying like, I think that's a bit much to ask. And then the old man replies, not so tall that you can't reach. And then basically the old man tells him part of the story, and he says, in order for you to know more about the story, you're going to have to get a hold of Pie and let him tell you about the story. And then at the end of the author's notes, there's like a little quote that I've taken out. It says, ... do not support our artists, then we sacrifice our imagination to the altar of crude reality, and we end up believing in nothing and having worthless dreams. So this is an important quote that plays later on in the book. So just take note of it, because basically what this quote is saying is that if we choose not to have an imagination anymore, then we're basically living in reality. And reality is like cruel if you look at it, and we end up having no dreams. Because when you have a dream, it's like you're imagining something. Okay, then the book is split up into 3 parts. So this is part 1, Toronto and Pondicherry. So this is talking about Pie in Toronto, where he lives now, and Pondicherry, where he used to live. So chapter 1, the first sentence is, my suffering left me sad and gloomy. Now this is another sentence that you're going to have to remember, like a quote, because once again it plays on later in the book, and I think that you're going to have to remember this one because it'll help you understand the way Pie was feeling. And then in chapter 1 he just talks about like how he's studying academics and religion and how they brought him back to life. So he's studying religious studies and zoology. And he talks about how he chose to study the sloth, and then he says like its demeanor soothes his shattered soul. So that's something you also have to remember, the sloth saying it soothed his shattered soul. And the reason why you have to remember that is because you kind of have to ask like, why is his soul shattered? And it will help you understand later on in the book as well. And then he says that the sloth has this like smiling aspect about it. And then he says, I am not one given to projecting human traits and emotions onto animals. The reason why I've quoted that as well is because it also plays on later on in the book. So that's another important sentence that you should mark, like just underline with a pencil or something. And then he says later on in chapter 1 at some point, when you've suffered a great deal in life, each additional pain is both unbearable and trifling. So he says this when he doesn't win an award for one of his zoology things. And he's basically just saying like it's like adding salt to the wound. And then he says, my life is like a memento mori painting, which is like a reminder of death. So he's saying his life is like a reminder of death. So these extracts here are like very important as well. So underline those as well. And then he briefly mentions Richard Parker. He mentions how he misses him and how he has nightmares, but they are nightmares tinged with love. That's another thing you must pay attention to. It will make sense later on in the book. It's just one of those sentences that you must pay more attention to. And then he talks about how he was in the hospital at Mexico, and the first time he ever turned on a tap, he fainted because of how wasteful it was, because there was so much water coming out that tap that he actually couldn't like believe it. And this is something else you're going to want to take note of when you go further on in the book. I don't want to spoil it for you because you have to take the story as it comes, but I'm just letting you know what sort of things you need to look out for now, so that they can help you later on in the novel to understand it. And then the waiter asks him, so then he talks about how the first time he was eating at a restaurant in Canada, the waiter asks him, fresh off the boat are you? And he says he blanches, and he feels like sick, and he doesn't like, the waiter doesn't understand how much that hurt him. And once again, this is something that will play further on in the book. Okay, then you go to chapters 2, and it's from the author's perspective, the author of the author's notes, not Jan Mantal. And he basically just describes Pi, and he just says that when Pi talks, like he launches forth. He doesn't like hold back, like he just gets straight into the storytelling mode. And then chapter 3, it basically talks about Pi and how he was named after a swimming pool. And his parents loved the idea of swimming even though they couldn't swim. And he had an uncle named Mamaji, Mama meaning uncle and Ji like an affectionate term. And he was just saying like Mamaji taught him how to swim. And how Mamaji said to Pi, this is my gift to you. Now this is very important because later on in the book, you will see how this really was a gift to Pi. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do for now. I'm going to link the other reading chapters so that you can have those chapters read to you, and then you can come back for the analysis to see what's important to take note of. Yeah, so I hope this helps.